Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, The Mighty Bjorn, and today for you I have another Skies of Ace Combat video. Today I'm actually going to be talking about a plane that was just recently modded into Ace Combat 7, and that's actually going to be the F-5 Tiger E, which I'm mostly going to be covering the A and B in this video, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about the mods, so bear with me. Let's get into the development. Now, the F-5 was designed and produced by Northrop. Now, initially, the design process would actually begin in the late 1950s as a private venture. This was just something Northrop was doing. There was actually no order for this plane. The F-5A and B would be known as the Freedom Fighter, but later the F-5E and the F-5F would be known as the Tiger II. The F-5 was designed to be a high-performance but cheap-to-produce design. Another feature of the design would be upgradability. I want everybody to understand that at the time, a lot of fighters was not, how would I say, pre-designed to be upgraded to extend its service life. But that was a feature of the F-5, is that everything for the F-5 was to be designed so it could be upgraded to continue its service life over its time, which was actually quite ahead of its time realistically, as most planes at the time were literally kind of getting pushed off to the side within about 10 years of the plane's development, which of course, as planes were getting more and more expensive, that was going to become more and more of a problem. The F-5 was designed primarily to be an air superiority fighter. However, the F-5 also proved to be capable at ground attack, especially delivering bombs. This is particularly during the Vietnam War period. The F-5 is actually armed with two M39 20mm cannons, and they're actually in the nose. They're side by side. And it's actually interesting when I was doing the research to find out that these cannons were actually designed during World War II in the 1940s. The F-5 can also carry up to 1,996 kilograms of bombs, rockets, missiles, and fuel tanks. Basically, they just would attach whatever is necessary as mission depended. The F-5 would feature two General Electric J85 turbojet engines, which actually produced a very good amount of thrust versus weight. The F-5A was a single-seat fighter, while the F-5B was a two-seat design. Now, the F-5A was the actual fighter, where the F-2 was basically designed to be a trainer plane. The F-5 also only had, the F-5B only had one 39 20mm autocannon versus the F-5A having two. The F-5 was approved for service, and it would enter service with the United States Air Force in 1962. And it would also later enter service with the United States Navy, which their variant is the F-5N. And it would also enter service with the United States Marines as well. It is mostly used now as an adversary trainer, and it is still currently in service with the United States as well as other countries. Actually, there's quite a few countries where this is still a primary fighter, so it's actually, if you will, still even though it's a third generation fighter, it is actually a still primary frontline service fighter. The F-5E experienced a series of upgrades to extend the service life of the F-5. It adopted a new planar radar array. The new AN APQ-159 will replace the AN APQ-153 radar. The cockpit itself would also receive a series of upgrades, including new displays, more multi-purpose displays, if you will. It would also have they would also add compatibility with the AIM 120 AMRAAM and the Rafale Python air-to-air missile systems. And understand that when this plane was introduced, those missiles didn't really exist yet. They were still several years out before actually entering service. The AMRAAM, not so much, but it was still quite a bit out. And at the time, the primary guided missile was actually, I believe, the AIM 9B Sidewinder. So, you know, while this was set up to take Sidewinders, it really wasn't set up to take AMRAAMs. As of 2022, the F-5 is still in service with numerous countries, and it would seem that it's going to continue service for actually quite a few years to come. Now, my thoughts about the plane is I think it's a really cool plane. It's got some really interesting features to it. I mean, it was the planes were actually getting big at the time. Were getting bigger and bigger, and they were getting heavier and heavier. I.e., look at the F4, great example of a bigger, heavier plane than the F5. When they developed this, they were shooting for a much smaller, much lighter plane, and they were also shooting for a plane that would prove to be reliable, very maneuverable, have high performance, and be cheap all at the same time, which is an incredible feat in itself at the time frame that we're talking about. And it would actually prove to be actually a relatively good fighter plane, especially for air superiority. And at times I kind of look at this and think that maybe this was some kind of evolution from the F-104. Now, I did actually do research in that, and it doesn't really seem like that's the case, but it does, even still, after doing the research, I kind of look at this and go, this is an evolution. It's got to be some type of evolution of the F-104 somewhere, that someone's idea was, let's take what the F-104 was and just make it better. And I mean, the F-104, you can argue how good or how bad the F-104 was. I mean, I know there was a lot of safety issues with the F-104, and I've actually done a previous video talking about the F-104C in particular, but I also talk about some of the other variants and service records, especially with the F-104G, which was the German version of the F-104. But of course, by this point, we're talking 1960s into the 1970s. The F-104 would definitely be very long on the tooth and needed replaced. And this just seemed kind of like a logical step forward from the F-104 of just being a smaller, lightweight, very fast plane. Now, that being said, this would also end up being much more agile than the F-104. It also proved to be even more agile than the F4. That being said, though, once again, I said a bit ago about the F4 being a much larger, heavier plane, so that kind of has to go into the figurement. Now, with that being said, even though the engines were quite large on the F4, the engines on this would actually prove to be more powerful. They'd provide more power to thrust ratio, and the engines, even though they've been upgraded over the years, they're still the J85 engines. It's just they've been upgraded quite a bit. They've made them more fuel efficient. They've increased the power to weight ratio, things of that nature, and just generally made the design simple and overall pretty reliable. From what I was seeing during my research, is it seems like this is an extremely reliable plane. Now, for Ace Combat, this plane is actually a modded plane. It is a replacement for the F2, and the creator is Konsag, which he's actually ported some models in before. This is actually a port from Ace Combat and Infinity. Now, for weapons loadout, it's got the quad air-to-air missiles, as well as it's got the quick maneuverability air-to-air missiles. Now here I use the quad air-to-air missiles in this, and it's also got quad air-to-ground missiles as well for part of the mod, and it also comes with multiple skins. I think the mod looks rather good. The only thing about it, though, is when I was looking at the cockpit, I don't know. The cockpit doesn't quite look right to me. It looks more like the F-16 than this does. This is the actual F-4B cockpit. But you know what? I'm not going to judge too much because when it comes to the exterior model and how the cockpit looks, it still looks fine to me. It's good enough. And that being said, well, I mean, this is an arcadey, flight game. This isn't a simulator. So does it have to be perfect? Not really. At least this one, there is a cockpit view. And for the most part, all you're really looking at is what you see here most of the time. So, yeah, I mean, I took a quick look at the cockpit, but it is what it is. So anyway, I'll throw a link for the mod for his F5 Tiger 2 in the Discord channel, or sorry, for the Nexus link. I'll throw it in the video description so that way people can go download this really good mod that Consag had done. Anyway, folks, I'm actually going to wrap this video up at that. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and hopefully I'll see you again for the next Skies of Ace Combat video.